Thank you, Mary. Matthew Bishop, some of the things that Mary described are really the nuts and bolts of the capitalist architecture, or the architecture of capitalism in the world today. And you've written about the marriage, the nexus, really, of philanthropy and capitalism. And one half of that marriage, capitalism, is really in the process of a fundamental transformation. So how do you see that relationship going forward?
Well, yeah, as you say, I mean, I have this title for my book which combines philanthropy and capitalism, so it took a lot of thought to come up with that. Philanthro-capitalism. But as you can imagine,
the most
it's impossible to
you'll
say.
Hear in one word today.
Possible to say, but anyway, as you can imagine, the subtitle of the book is How the Rich Can Save the World. And as you can also imagine, launching a book with that title 3 days after Lehman Brothers went bust was a heroic idea, to say the least.
He's the optimist among us.
It was funny, the first person I gave the book to was a venture capitalist, and he said, I'm sure it's a great book, but terrible timing. And he thought about it, and he said, but actually I can give it to all my friends for Christmas to say I still think they're rich, which I thought was a great line. So since then, two things have happened, really. One has been that, whilst my sort of general gloom about what a terrible piece of timing has continued in terms of sort of the mainstream conversation, privately, it's been very, very interesting. There's been just lots and lots of meetings to talk about the ideas in the book, and they've been remarkably positive, and I mean that in two particular ways. The first is, the book is not just about people giving their money away, it's about people giving their ideas away or putting their ideas into action. It's about people like Bill Gates and Michael Bloomberg and George Soros and so forth, really applying sort of the sort of entrepreneurial mindset that they applied in their business to solving some of the world's big problems. Now, they are still doing that, and what's interesting to me is, although they are clearly, all of them, even Soros and Gates, less wealthy than they were before, more and more people who are engaged in philanthropy are actually saying, well, now is the time to really focus on making sure every dollar we give is having an impact, which is really what the book is about. How do you have an impact? How do you work with non-profits that have the best ideas to really make a difference? And I think both in the non-profit sector, there is a realization that actually there's a lot of duplication and a lot of things that need to be rationalized, and so the best non-profits will emerge. And likewise, the philanthropists are saying, well, actually, a lot of us are funding a lot of stuff that we are, again, duplicating. We don't really measure what works and what doesn't. We've not been taking hard decisions about who we rally behind. And now you're seeing a lot of discussion around prioritization. These organizations must survive and grow. These we must walk away from, however hard it is. And that, to me, is a very business-like attitude. In a crisis in business, that's where the great entrepreneurs build new businesses. I'm hearing that stuff going on in philanthropy. The other, and I guess that is also, it's very interesting that people who have been in government are really interested in the ideas. Bill Clinton has been a great supporter of the book, and he says this, and I'm sure he'll say it again this evening, that when he was in government, people used to say, what are the problems you're going to fix? How much are you going to spend? He says since leaving government, he's been obsessed with how do we actually solve the problem, rather than how much do we spend. And he is turning more and more to philanthropists and non-profits as the people who answer the how-to question. I think that how-to question becomes more and more important in this era of really big but stretched government. Mm-hmm. The other way in which I think the idea is an idea that's time has come is that there's been a huge surge, almost, I think, from the week that Lehman Brothers went bust, of people saying, well, actually, that old paradigm of capitalism has failed. Absolutely intellectually dominant idea, and the idea is broken. And the question is, how do you come out of this crisis with a better version of capitalism than before? And it's absolutely clear to me that there is a desire to put values and long-term commitment to the sustainability of society right at the heart of the new capitalism that comes out. And I think, the philanthrocapitalism, as I call it, will be one of those ideas that we will look back on the old paradigm and say that was the seed of the new capitalism rather than a toxic idea of the old capitalism. So I'm very optimistic about this crisis being a way that we actually come out with a better way ahead than we went into it with.
Thank you, Matthew. Andrew Sorkin, Matthew's talked about, to some extent, many people around the world have viewed Wall Street as synonymous with capitalism. But of course, you've been one of the leading writers in showing just how badly bruised Wall Street has been. Therefore, capitalism as well has suffered. So moving forward, what is it going to take, and what are the right fixes to Wall Street in order to contribute to this new capitalism that Matthew is describing?
Well, there's 2 points. First is, I think you're right. The old version of capitalism is broken. You nodded your head that it wasn't broken, I think. No, it's not broken, but we'll talk about that. I think it is broken, and I think Matthew is right, because I think there is a new way forward, and we will see that play out over the next several years. The answer, for better or worse, I think, is going to be an enormous amount of regulation that is no doubt going to go too far, at least initially. These pendulums seem to swing always too far on the ends, but I do think that at base, and I don't know how many Wall Streeters we have in this room are going to get very upset with me, I do think there's a compensation issue that will get addressed, and I think that will actually change fundamentally the industry. We're now seeing a lot of the banks, JP Morgan being one and Goldman being the other, talking about giving their TARP money back, in part, I think, so they can actually go back to the old comp days. I really do think it's going to be very hard at the end of this year if you start seeing bankers making $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $20, $30, $40 million in a year, what type of populist outrage you're going to have and what that's going to do to the regulatory environment. In part, I think it'll actually make it much worse. So I think what we're going to see is a couple of things. Obviously, the leverage is going to come down, which is going to be a problem, not just here in this country, but more importantly, when you're trying to think about funding projects in Africa. These things are not going to get funded. The good news is that obviously we were funding lots of things that probably didn't make sense, and so you had private equity firms that it was cheaper for them to borrow money than it was for a company. It is now back in the court of the company, and that means that we might actually be able to have some real growth from some real businesses as opposed to some sort of shuffle of the money. But to me, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to comp. It's going to come down to changing the culture of Wall Street. Wall Street is a business about making money. That is the business. Teachers want to educate. Journalists want to inform. Wall Street, I'm sure there are people who'd be upset with me for saying this. It is about making money, and I think the real question is how we're going to be able to find a way to compensate people at a lower level when that is the goal.